Views expressed by Camaplan podcast guests may not reflect those of Camaplan. Camaplan does not guarantee the accuracy of information provided by guests, nor does it endorse or recommend any individual or organization. Camaplan is not an investment advisor, CPA, realtor, or attorney. You are encouraged to conduct your own due diligence before making investment choices. For any tax, legal, accounting, investment, or other questions, please consult a specialist. Hi, I'm Michael Duncan, and welcome back to The Road to Financial Freedom. This podcast is brought to you by Camaplan, a self-directed IRA administrator focused on educating investors on how to grow retirement savings faster through alternative investments. In each episode, we're going to take an in-depth look at the many roads taken to financial freedom and how they differ for each of our guests. Our goal is to help the listeners learn how they can achieve their own financial freedom through the experience and stories of experts that have done just that. Today's guest is the founder of one of the largest boutique estate planning and asset protection law firms in Texas. Founded with the singular goal to be the best resource in the community for estate planning, elder law, and asset protection, his team now covers over 40 counties in Texas and Arkansas. I'm very excited to welcome John Ross to the show. John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm not doing half bad.
That's good.
Obviously we're here. I'm here to pick your brain to learn about how you got to where you are today, the journey you've been on, and some of the decisions you've had to make on that journey. So could you just give a quick, synopsis of what you do, what exactly you do on a day-to-day basis, I guess?
Yeah. So our entire firm is designed around protecting people, their loved ones, from the various threats that may be out there to them. Now that could be, that could be somebody, maybe they're in a high risk profession. They're worried about malpractice lawsuits. Maybe they're in a business environment that fluctuates and they could have a bankruptcy or something like that. Maybe they're an older person and they're concerned about their long-term care, their medical costs, causing them to lose everything that they've managed to accumulate over the years. So it's this kind of, or maybe it's their kids and they've got two good kids and they've got one that's kind of a train wreck, and so we need to plan for that one, right? So it's all these outside factors that can come in and derail somebody's plans, and we want to be able to plan around those using whatever tools are available to us, whether that's businesses or trusts, and knowing about the tax law and how to play in that field as well to get the best results for all of this.
That makes a ton of sense. And, unfortunately, I've had to go through a little bit of this myself. So I have some, general experience, kind of understanding how all of this works, not how it works, but what you have to go through when you're trying to figure out how it works. And it can be, unfortunately, complicated. And there's a lot of things that go into it. So I'm sure that having someone like you who completely understands what they're doing, unlike me, is probably, a very important step in handling all of those situations.
Yeah, there's really, no doubt about it. I think with anytime you're getting into your personal finances or your how you're going to live your life and how you're going to pass things on and stuff like that, there's a team building component to all of this. Typically, having a good accountant that can make sure that you're in compliance and all of that sort of thing, making sure you have a good insurance agent that's not just getting you the best deals, but also getting you the kind of coverage that's really going to come into play if things do go bad. Having an attorney that, like you said, knows what they're doing, right? There's lots of attorneys out there. That doesn't mean the guy that did your divorce in 1985 is also the guy you go back to because you're just about to buy this investment property and you're trying to figure out how best to structure that.
Very true. Very true. I mean, I'm sure you can say better than most that, just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean you're a specialist in every single field that exists.
Right. Yeah. The old joke of, what do you call the guy that got the the lowest passing score on the bar exam.
Oh God, what is it?
Attorney,
Ah, nice. That
right?
makes sense. Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah. So could you let's go back a little bit. How at what point did you kind of think you found your calling in this type of law? And why did this kind of call out to you?
Yeah, so I'll give you the kind of the long answer, but it was a journey. I was in the Marines. I was enlisted in the Marines in the infantry. I knew that wasn't for me. So after my 4 years, I get out. I go back to college. Just went into as a just kind of a general business major and absolutely fell in love with accounting of all things. I
Oh,
mean, you've got to be a certain level of nerd right there.
I feel
Um,
it. Yeah.
and then on top of that, within the accounting field, I loved tax law and or taxation, and so I thought, well, I need to know as much as I can about this tax world. And then my professor said, well, really, maybe you should consider going to law school and becoming a tax attorney. And so I thought, well, that's great. That sounds like a neat idea. So I'd never really thought about going to law school, so off I go to law school, mostly with the idea of being a tax attorney. But then, you get into law school and you start studying business entities, and you get into all that whole world, and then you also get into the wills and the trusts and the estate planning and how the death tax impacts all of that, and all of these other things. And then I get out, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, okay, yeah, I know the tax stuff backward and forward, but do I really want to spend my days arguing back and forth with the IRS? Helping people that for whatever reason have gotten caught up in the system, or do I want to try to maybe prevent people from ever getting into the system in the first place? And early on, I had a couple of really kind of interesting cases where, I had some there was this guy, and he had been injured in a catastrophically injured. He no arms, one leg after this accident, but he was going to get a settlement from this injury. But of course, he relies on need-based government benefits for
Yeah.
his housing, his somebody to brush his teeth. Right? He's got no arms, and um, and so the attorneys that were doing that work, they called me and they said, okay, John, you're the expert in trust. Surely you could create something where he could get this settlement, but still keep his government benefits. And I said, sure, I could do that. I really had no idea, but I thought, it's got to be a way, right?
Yeah.
And so I start digging into, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security benefits, and all of these other things. And sure enough, there were resources there. Well, I'm solving it for this guy, and in the meantime, I'm having clients who are calling me and saying, my mom has Alzheimer's. And I'm thinking, wow, okay, well, yeah, this guy's got no arms and one leg, but this lady has Alzheimer's, but they need the similar levels of care. Well,
Yeah.
so maybe we should create, maybe I can do the same thing for her that I did for this other guy. And then I'm talking to those people, and then of course their kid says, well, by the way, you've protected my mom's assets, and I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon. um, what should I be considering in case there's a malpractice lawsuit? Because there's almost surely gonna be. It's just maybe it's legitimate, maybe it's not, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna get sued. So what do I need to think about? And I realized that really with all of these things, there just were not a lot of attorneys that had any real idea. Um, it was too many different, distinct elements of law that were all combining into one area. And so you might have folks that were an expert in one field, but they didn't know enough about another to really advise these people. And so I thought, well, you know what? We're just, uh, this is all I'm going to do. I'm going to start my own firm, and this is all we're going to do, and we're going to know everything about it, and we're going to be the center for people to come to and say, hey, here's my deal. I have rental real estate. What should I be worried about? I have I'm buying into a franchise, and I'm going to have to get into this long-term lease agreement. What do I need to worry about? Whatever the deal is, right? And yeah, so that's how it went.
So okay, so I absolutely have a couple questions. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot in this episode, as I do in most episodes. But so, what use is a trust outside of the person passing away? Like, I'm familiar with it from the point of view of, your mother has Alzheimer's, and the trust kind of just it allows certain things, whether it be a house or money or assets or whatever, to be in kind of a protected space. But like, how does the trust work, and why does it come into play with something like a neurosurgeon's malpractice lawsuit?
Right. So, a couple of things. So, to start off, saying the word trust is much like saying the word surgery. If I get a mole removed, arguably that's a form of surgery,
Yeah.
relatively minor, relatively simple. On the other hand, the what that pediatric neurosurgeon does, that's a whole different level of surgery that involves a lot more complexity, but it's also going to solve a different problem.
Yeah.
Right. So when you just say the word trust, you got to understand there's lots and lots of different types. And even within one category, what really matters is the words on the page.
Hmm.
That ultimately, that's it. But what you will find is you'll find all trusts have three things in common. You've got the person that creates it, the grantor or trustor or whatever you want to call it, settlor. You got the person that creates it. You got the person who's in charge of it, the trustee. And then you have the person or people that receive the benefit of it. So the beneficiaries. So grantor, trustee, beneficiaries. Depending on how you structure that trust, it could do lots of different things. It could be something as simple as a way to pass my assets at death to my kids. That'd be probably the most common type of trust you would see out there. Is really it's a will substitute,
Hmm.
right? On the other hand, for example, in the United States, we have 21 states in the United States that have what are referred to as self-settled domestic asset protection trusts.
That's a
Uh,
mouthful.
And then or you'll see it often simplified to DAPT or domestic asset
I
protection
like it.
trust. So this is a set of statutes that say a person can create a trust, transfer their own assets into that trust, name themselves as a beneficiary of that trust, and then shield those assets from their creditors.
Interesting.
Right. So for example, let's say I were to create one of those trusts, and I was to transfer some investment land that I have, because I don't want that to ever get tied up in a lawsuit. So I transfer that investment land into this trust. Now I'm still a beneficiary of it. So if I cut some timber or if I lease it out to some hunters or whatever the deal is, I can use that money. I can enjoy the fruits and benefits of this property because I'm a beneficiary of the trust. But after I do that, I'm driving down the road. I've got 4 kids. They're all young adults, which means the only way you communicate with them is through text message. And so I'm driving along, and one of them texts me, and I know better, but I glance down at my phone, as you do. But that just happens to be when somebody pulls out in front of me. There's a car wreck. It's clearly my fault because I was being stupid, um, and so there's some sort of subsequent lawsuit, right?
Hmm.
And maybe they even go so far as to get a judgment against me in excess of my car insurance, right? I got $300,000 policy on the car insurance, but man, that was a bad deal, and they've got a judgment for 500,000. They'd like to get their other 200,000 out of me, and so they're looking around. What assets can we get of John's? Well, they're not getting what's in that trust.
So why doesn't everyone do that with everything they own? I feel like that's a stupid question, and I'm sure there's a very logical answer to it. But why not put everything I have in a trust all the time?
Right. Well, I guess so. So one one obvious question or one obvious answer to that question was, when I said the word DAPT. Had you heard it before?
No, absolutely not.
And there you go.
Oh, oh, so I can.
Right. I mean,
Oh,
that's kind of the beauty of it, right? I mean, it's not exclusive to certain people or anything like that, right? Now, is it appropriate for everybody? Probably not. Let's say that I'm in Texas as we speak right now. Texas has some of the strongest homestead protections in the country. I've often joked with clients that are in, Oklahoma or Arkansas or maybe even California or New York, and they'll say, "Well, what's the best way to protect my house?" And I'll say, "Well, move to Texas and buy one." So but I guess where I was going with that is if the only asset I had in the whole world was a home, that was my predominant asset, and I lived in a jurisdiction like Texas or maybe Florida or someplace that has really strong homestead protections, well, that type of trust would be overkill.
Okay.
Why put
Yeah.
a protected asset into a trust that is also a protected asset? That's double dipping, right? So no
Yeah.
real benefit in it. Wouldn't justify the cost of setting it up and things like that. On the other hand, if I have a house in Texas, but I have a lake house in Arkansas, well, the lake house in Arkansas, that's not a protected asset. And so, hey, maybe I should consider putting that house in. And Arkansas, by the way, I say Arkansas because Arkansas is the 21st state to adopt the domestic asset protection trust statutes.
Okay.
I actually drafted it for the state of Arkansas's legislators, and they put the bill up in this last legislative session, and it passed about 2 months ago. So
Oh,
and I also have a lake house in Arkansas, which, hey, I might want to put my lake
yeah.
house in a domestic asset protection trust just in case there is a liability out there. It's still my house. I can still stay in it. I can still have fun with it. I could sell it if I wanted to, but it's now shielded from a future creditor.
And so, if we look at something you mentioned that I wanted to ask about, because I don't exactly know what it is, and that's the death tax. I'm sure that plays into a lot of this stuff, especially when you're looking at a trust with, it's specifically designed to give something as someone passes away. Um, so, could you explain what that is and how a trust kind of works alongside that or against it or whatever it is?
Yeah. So the interesting thing with the death tax is it actually creates two different scenarios that are potentially beneficial or detrimental depending on how much money you have.
Great.
So, under the current law, as we sit here today, you would have to have an estate in excess of $12.93 million to have to worry about the death tax.
Oh, great. Okay, I'm good.
So, most of us going to slide well under that. Now, I will say that law has a built in expiration date. It was part of the Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that
Hmm.
raised it to the current 12 million, but they have an expiration date of 2026. If it goes to 2026 and doesn't change, it will go back to what it was under the Obama administration, which was anything above 5 million would be subject to the death tax. That 5 million should be adjusted for inflation for a few
Yeah.
years, blah, 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 right? Um, so on the other hand, if I'm below those numbers, there's actually a tax benefit to dying. The
Good to
tax,
hear.
right? Yeah. So the tax benefit to dying is what we call the step up in basis on date of death. So I buy a piece of property for $10 and it has appreciated to $100, right? If I were to sell it, I would have to pay tax on the difference between what I paid for it and what I sell it for. What I
Hmm.
pay for is my basis. So I would have to pay tax on $90. And so current capital gains tax could be 15 to 20%, give or take. On the other hand, if I hold on to this and then when I die, you inherit the property.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was very kind.
Um, for tax purposes, it's as if you went out and paid fair market value on the date of my death. You get a brand new basis.
Okay.
So it's like you went out and paid $100 because that's what it's worth. And if you turned around and sold it right then for $100, that would be a tax-free sale.
Got it.
Okay. So when one big aspect in trust design is, do we want those assets that are in that trust to be part of the deceased person's estate so they get that step up in basis? Or do we not want them to be part of their estate so they're not subject to the death tax? Because you're going to get one or the other.
Hmm.
And so if I have a client that has maybe a middle class family, right? They've got a house, a car, and I don't know, $250,000 to say a 2 or 3 or 4 million, right? Um, I'm going to be much more concerned about their assets getting the step up in basis at the date of death. On the other hand, I've got a client right now. His net worth is about 50 million. It's made up primarily of real estate,
Hmm.
and it's all highly appreciated real estate. But I'm actually much less concerned about a step up in basis, because if he dies, we're talking about a 40% tax on everything over roughly $13 million. Well, on a $50 million estate, that's a big old fat chunk of money.
Yeah.
So I might want to be using some sort of trust assets. I'm less concerned about the step up in basis. They're probably not going to sell any property anyway, and if they do, hey, pay some taxes on it. Fine.
Yeah.
But I don't want them to lose virtually half of everything that he's accumulated over his lifetime to a ridiculous death tax.
That makes total sense. And by the way, thank you for explaining it to me as if I have no clue what you're talking about, because it's extremely helpful and I truly have no basis to go off of. So I really appreciate that. And the
Well,
listeners do as well.
and nobody does, right? I mean, that's
No,
the whole thing is people don't just wake up one morning and understand,
it'd be
step up
nice.
in basis, right? I mean, that's not part of the ordinary day-to-day vocabulary. I've got a son, he's a material science engineer currently working with the Edison lab in Schenectady, New York, GE. And he was trying to tell me what he's working on this summer, and he can't even break it down to a level that I understand.
Yep.
But luckily I've had 20 years of explaining relatively complicated concepts to average everyday folks.
Yeah. No, that's incredible and extremely helpful. Um, so now moving forward again, and so you've started your own firm, you've found your own niche within, the crossing of paths between different areas of law or tax rules and regulations. Um, how tough was it to really kind of get started in that niche? And something I like to ask a lot on this show is I like people to share their mistakes and what they learned from them, because I think often you learn more from mistakes than you do, when you succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that because this is not, you wouldn't be able to go to a law school in the country that I'm aware of and take a class on asset protection. Now, could take a class on taxation, you could take a class on trust, you could take a class on business entities, but to take a class on asset protection as just a subject matter, you're just probably not going to find one.
Yeah.
Same thing if you were trying to find a class on how to shield grandma's house from the nursing home, right? You're just that class doesn't hardly exist out there.
Yeah.
And so it has been very difficult over the years trying to come up with strategies, because I'm not just utilizing what somebody else has already done. In
Mhm.
many cases, we are inventing the wheel, where we're trying to do something. Luckily, there are a number of attorneys around the country that are very, very good at this. And we often are relatively collaborative. And so there are folks that I can call and say, "Hey, I've got this unique situation." That attorney may be in Las Vegas, they might be in New York, but we're such a small community that we can usually collaborate on those sort of things and come up with solutions. But it is very difficult. It's also, as a business owner, just talking purely from a business standpoint, I have a very hard time recruiting attorneys. And part of that is because the average law student graduate out there just has really no concept of what it is that we do.
Yeah.
And even if they do, it seems overly complicated. It doesn't sound all that interesting to them. They want to go be Atticus Finch and fight the good fight in the courthouse, right? They've watched too many Law and Order episodes.
Haven't we all?
And if you haven't, I don't know where you've been for the last 30 years. That's right.
Very true.
But yeah, so there's that. Now, as far as the mistakes, yeah, I have made them, continue to make them. A lot of that, I will say, is because of, in many cases, we are doing novel things. And so when you're doing something novel, you may or may not know that it's going to work until it's tested.
Yeah.
And so you try something, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And again, as long as the client understands that you're trying something novel and that it may or may not work, and they're okay with it, the potential risk outweigh or the potential reward outweighs the potential risk, and they're all good with it. So yeah, we try it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You learn something regardless.
Yeah.
And I've had situations where we thought something would work. It got challenged in whatever way, shape, or form. We litigated it. It didn't work. You see that a lot with tax cases. People will be creative with their taxes. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose.
Yep.
It also is why you have to stay up to date on all of these sort of things, because it does change rapidly.
Yeah, I'm always surprised. Obviously, here at Camoplan, like we deal with self-directed IRAs and retirement funds, and I'm always surprised as someone with not, an extended history within this field, at how often these things are changing and how consistently you have to update your knowledge and you have to learn more if you want to stay on top of things, not only to avoid making mistakes, but also to take advantage. Sounds a little harsh, but to execute the laws and the rules to their fullest potential.
Oh yeah, no, that's exactly right. And yeah, when you talk about something like a self-directed IRA, there's you can dig through the entire Internal Revenue Code, right? All million pages of it or whatever it is. You're never going to see the word self-directed IRA. You know, it's
Yeah.
it's a creation out there, and it can be a very valuable creation. And you're taking some parts of the IRA law. Yeah, you're looking at section 408 and 408A, and you're saying, okay, here's the basis for an IRA. Now we're gonna work within that, and we're gonna maximize our potential, because I don't want to just go to XYZ big box investment firm and let them put all of my assets into A shares, right? I want to use my retirement funds and buy some rental properties, and
Yeah.
or whatever it is. And yeah, but those rules are complex, and because they're not based on actual law but interpretations of laws or holes in laws, regulations get added. Those close some of those holes sometimes.
And that's where I'm assuming that's in the same kind of realm that you were talking about, where, because you're in a way inventing the wheel and you're creating a lot of this stuff, you don't know whether it's going to work until after it's tested. I'm assuming it exists in a very similar way.
Yeah, that's right. We mentioned like the Domestic Asset Protection Trust statute, and I said that 21 states have it. So the question becomes, for example, let's say I'm a Texas resident, but then I create a trust that's governed under the laws of the state of Arkansas. So and then I move my financial assets into this trust that's in Arkansas. Um, and then I get sued in Texas. So I'm a Texas resident being sued in Texas, and they get a judgment against me. Well, then is that Texas judgment going to be able to attack the Arkansas trust? Because
Mhm.
Texas doesn't have a law like that, but Arkansas does. And so which law is going to apply? And that's one of those things, these statutes are very, very new.
Yeah.
Arkansas having just passed it in the last month, right? So there's a lot of these kind of questions that are just not tested. We can
Yeah.
say, here's what the law says. The law says the assets in this trust are shielded. But Texas doesn't have that law. So if I'm a Texas resident, there's a question.
Yeah.
Could you still do it? Absolutely. Will it work 100%? Maybe.
I'm assuming precedent is being set all the time, basically.
Well, the interesting thing, at least on the trusts like that, on those DAPTs, they have been around in other states for a while.
Mhm.
Over probably 2 decades now, with I think Alaska maybe, or South Dakota being the first one, and then Delaware caught on, and Nevada and Tennessee and a bunch of others, right? Um, but there has not actually been a lot of precedent on these. In fact, very little. And the one or two cases that have popped up have been really weird situations. And so they're not really good to generalize out to a broader population. Some of the detractors on, say, DAPTs will say, well, they're too new. We don't know if they work, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Then you get proponents of them, and I would probably put myself in the proponent category. And one of our arguments is, well, the reason there's not a lot of case law out there is because they work.
So that's a very fair point. Yeah.
And you've probably heard most lawsuits out there in the world settle long before they ever go to trial, right? Yeah. And so if you have shielded a chunk of your assets in a trust like this, and now I'm suing you, right? And I'm trying to decide, should I settle or should I try to get a bigger judgment against you or get more money out of you? But I'm looking at, well, you've got all these assets in this trust and it's based out of Nevada and there's a Nevada trustee, and I'm going to have to get a trust attorney to come in and even explain this to me. And even if I did, I'm not sure that I can break this trust. There's no law about it. Well, you know what? I'll settle.
Yeah. At that point, it's not worth it.
Right. And so, a lot of these asset protection vehicles are not necessarily, you're never going to prevent a lawsuit. But does it enhance your settlement potential? No question about it.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. Enhance your settlement potential enough. And then maybe all they're going to do is say, you know what, we'll just take whatever the insurance company has given us and we're going to go away.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you. And before I ask you to plug yourself and let the listeners know where they can find you, I would love to just ask you the question I ask every guest that comes on here, and that is, what do the words financial freedom mean to you?
To me, financial freedom probably means not thinking about my own finances. And here's, when my partner and I, her name's Lisa Shoalmire, when she and I started our firm, we started it with 2 laptops and a card table. We bought the laptops on credit. We bought the furniture for our waiting room on credit because neither of us had any money. She owed a truckload of money to Baylor for law school. The military got me out of law school debt free, but I still didn't have any savings.
Yeah.
And what I have found, or what I can very clearly remember, living on credit for that first year of the business and watching that credit balance get bigger and bigger and wondering, geez, am I ever going to pay this back off?
Yeah.
And making choices, just going to something as simple as going to the grocery store and making a choice between, this cheese and that cheese based on a 40-cent difference, right? And you're budgeting that close. Whereas, I'm now at a point in my life where I can walk in and if the cheese looks good, I buy the cheese. I didn't even notice the fact that there's a cheaper, less flavorful cheese right next to it.
Yeah.
Because I have the financial freedom to buy the cheese I want to buy. And if it costs a little more, that's great. I love not thinking about it. Now, I do obviously think about it all the time, right?
Of course,
I'm saying, okay, well, should we, I've got this property and I've got a 1.8 mortgage on it, and I've got this other one that we just bought this year, and it's got a 6% mortgage on it, and I've got money over here that I could, do I cash in this money and pay off this high debt property, or do I do something else with the money? Am I going to make a better return on the investable assets than I am? Can I beat the 6% I've got? So yeah, I'm thinking about all of those sort of things, but I'm not thinking about the cost of the cheese when I go to the grocery store. And I love that.
It makes a difference with the little things.
It does. It really does. If I want to take my family out to dinner, I take my family out to dinner, and I'm not looking at the end of the month thinking, Oh, you know what? We're gonna have to go to Applebee's, and we're going before 5 o'clock so we can get the early deal, right?
Yep.
It's like, no, we're just gonna go wherever we want to go, and we're gonna have a delicious meal. And yeah, I'm gonna order the bottle of wine. Let's do this.
That is very well said. I love that. Um, so, John, thank you for coming on, and please let the listeners know where they can find you, how they can contact you, and that information, of course, will be in the description of this episode as well.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So the name of my firm is Ross and Shoalmire. Shoalmire is spelled Shoalmire. You can reach out to our website and contact me there. It's just rossandshulmire.com. We have a blog post on there, lots of information about different types of trusts and different types of business entity structuring and long-term care planning and all of that sort of stuff. I also host a podcast called Big Picture Retirement, and where I talk about how all of these sort of things play into your retirement strategy and different tax strategies you can use and things like that. So you can check me out at Big Picture Retirement as well.
Awesome. Well, John, thank you so much. I feel like I learned a ton today. I'm sure the listeners feel exactly the same. And you made it all very digestible, which is, exactly what I was hoping for.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for coming on. I had a wonderful time today.
Well, great. Anytime I'll be back. You just say the word.
Well, thank you. And as always, thank you for listening to The Road to Financial Freedom. If you enjoyed this show, please support the podcast by remembering to rate, review, and subscribe. You can keep up to date with us on Facebook or Instagram at Road to Financial Freedom Podcast. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. If you like what you're hearing on The Road to Financial Freedom and want to learn more about self-directed IRAs and 401ks, click the link in the description to download a free toolkit with everything you need to get started.